The ocean glimmered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a restless shimmer of blue that should have felt like freedom. But inside the Marlowe mansion, it was only a reflection of what Isabella Grant no longer had. The walls were white marble, cold and echoing, and every footstep carried like a reminder that she was never truly alone. Cameras watched from the corners, discreet black dots that blinked red when Richard was monitoring her feed from his office upstairs. She stood in front of the glass now, barefoot, clutching a half-empty wineglass she hadn't touched. Her reflection looked like someone she didn't recognize, a woman too polished, too quiet, with eyes that no longer burned for art or life. Just a few years ago, she'd been the curator everyone adored, the girl who could find beauty in dust and shadow. Now, her world revolved around keeping Richard calm. The door behind her opened, slow and deliberate. "You didn't answer when I called," Richard said. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that made people lean in during meetings, but made Isabella's heart sink. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to look casual, but everything about him was rehearsed. His smile, his touch, even his cruelty. "I was reading," she said softly, gesturing toward a closed book on the table. She hadn't been reading. Reading was impossible when you lived inside someone else's breath. He moved closer, his cologne too sharp, his gaze scanning her like a security code. "Who were you talking to earlier? The gardener again. You're getting too friendly with the staff. They have jobs to do, Isabella. And so do you." She swallowed, the air growing thinner. "I was just asking about the roses." He smiled without warmth. "You don't need to ask about anything. That's why I pay people." She turned away, the sea below glittering under sunset light, cruelly beautiful. "Richard, I just wanted—" "Enough!" he snapped, the words slicing through the room. He picked up her phone from the counter, swiping through messages. No new calls, no texts. Good. He placed it back down as if granting her a privilege. Her hands trembled, but she hid them behind her back. "I'm not your prisoner." Richard's laugh was soft, dangerous. "A prisoner. In this house, in this life." He gestured toward the sprawling view, the infinity pool, the sculpture garden below. "You have everything." "Except peace," she whispered. He heard it. He always did. The muscles in his jaw shifted, and for a moment the mask slipped. "You had peace when you obeyed me." He walked to the dresser, opened a drawer, and took out her passport. The navy blue cover looked small in his large hands. "Since you're so eager to leave, let me make sure you don't." Before she could speak, he tore it in half, the paper ripping with a sound that made her chest cave in. "Now you'll stay where you belong." Her heart pounded so hard she thought he could hear it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time in months. "Because I know you," he said simply. "You'd run the moment someone held the door open." He stepped out of the room, turned the lock, and the metallic click echoed louder than thunder. She pressed her palm against the door, shaking, the silence around her deafening. The mansion hummed with hidden security systems, mechanical whispers that reminded her escape was impossible. Isabella backed away until she reached the window. Outside, waves broke in silver foam against the shore. The horizon was fading, swallowed by night. Somewhere far beyond the glass and the guards, freedom waited, like a forgotten language she once spoke fluently. She sank to the floor, tears hot, against her skin, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow I'll find a way out." The lights dimmed automatically at 9, as they always did. Richard's voice played faintly through the intercom. "Good night," a command disguised as affection. But Isabella didn't sleep. She traced the cracks in the torn passport, the last proof of the woman she used to be, and beneath the suffocating quiet of her golden cage, she began to plan. The rain started before midnight, the kind of Miami rain that fell heavy and hot, turning the streets into mirrors, and the mansion into a cage of sound. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the locked door. Every drop of water outside sounded like a countdown. She had not eaten since morning, and her throat burned from swallowing words that never made it out loud. Richard's voice still echoed through the walls, like a ghost replaying its cruelty. You'd run the moment someone held the door open. He was right, but that didn't mean she wouldn't try. The house creaked as it cooled. A storm warning flashed through the window, the light from the ocean far below flickering between lightning strikes. She rose and pressed her palm to the glass. The wind howled, and for the first time in months, she felt something that wasn't fear, it was possibility. A thin crack had formed in the frame where the stormproof window met the wall, and she could feel air seeping through cold and wild. She scanned the room, eyes darting to the vanity mirror, the jewelry box, the heavy curtains. Everything he had bought to decorate her prison could be a tool if she used it right. She found one of his cufflinks left on the dresser, gold with his initials RM, the kind of object meant to be admired, not used. She jammed it into the door's keyhole, twisting until her fingers bled. The lock resisted, then shifted with a soft click. She froze, listening. No footsteps, no alarm, heart pounding. She opened the door an inch. The hallway lights glowed low, automatic night mode. The cameras turned slowly in their fixed arcs, blind for a few seconds at each rotation. She counted the rhythm, waited, then moved barefoot and silent down the corridor, past the portraits he hung of them together, every smile of hers forced, every gaze of his possessive. The storm outside was fierce now, thunder shaking the glass walls. She reached the main staircase and spotted the security console glowing near the entryway. Its red lights meant the alarms were active, but next to it hung the spare key to the service door. She had seen Richard use it 100 times. She crept forward one step at a time, and then a voice broke the silence. Isabella. Where are you? His tone was sharp, distant, somewhere upstairs. She froze, breath trapped in her chest. He was supposed to be asleep, but the thunder had woken him. The floor above creaked, a shadow moved across the landing. She grabbed the key, her hands slick with sweat, and ran for the service door. The alarm shrieked as soon as she opened it, a sound that tore through the storm and her fear at once. She didn't stop. She ran into the rain, barefoot on marble, then mud, the storm drenching her hair, whipping it across her. Face behind her, Richard shouted her name, but the wind stole the sound. She climbed over the side gate, scraping her arm on the iron edge, and fell onto the soaked grass of the neighbor's lawn. The street beyond was a blur of flashing light and endless wet sky. A passing truck slowed, the driver shouting if she needed help. She nodded, climbed in, trembling, her nightgown plastered to her skin. The man looked at her through the mirror. "You okay, miss?" She managed to whisper only one word: north. The truck roared away, leaving the mansion behind, lightning flashing against the ocean like the world had cracked open. Inside the house, Richard stood in the open doorway, rain soaking his perfect shirt, his anger twisting into something colder. He looked at the broken lock, the empty hallway, the security feed looping static, and realized she was gone. For the first time, Richard Marlowe felt something unfamiliar, not control, not victory, but fear, because he knew Isabella better than anyone. And he knew this time she wasn't coming back. The bus rattled through the night, while the storm chased it up the coast, lightning flashing across the wet glass. Isabella sat near the back, her hands wrapped around her knees, every jolt of thunder echoing in her bones. She didn't know where she was going, only that each passing mile put another heartbeat of distance between her and Richard Marlowe. The driver's radio crackled with weather alerts, roads closed, flooding ahead. The world outside was chaos, but inside she felt something even stronger rising, a strange, unfamiliar kind of hope. Her hair clung to her face, her clothes soaked through, and the sketchbook on her lap was bent and ruined, but she held it like a lifeline. It was the only thing left that was hers. The bus stopped at a small diner near the border of Georgia, and the driver announced a break. 15 minutes. She stepped out into air that smelled like wet asphalt and coffee. The neon sign flickered over her head, and for the first time in months, she wasn't being watched. Inside the diner, the warmth hit her like sunlight. She took a seat in the corner next to the window, trying to make herself invisible. A waitress poured coffee without asking. "You looked like you ran from a ghost." "Honey." Isabella smiled, weakly, and whispered, "I did." The woman blinked, uncertain, but said nothing more. The news played on a small television above the counter, flashing images of flooded highways and stock markets, and then a familiar face, Richard Marlowe, was giving a statement to reporters about an upcoming charity merger. The sight of him made her breath stop. His voice filled the diner, calm, powerful, convincing the world he was a man of integrity. No one would ever believe what happened behind those glass walls. She turned away, her stomach twisting, and left before anyone noticed her shaking. She walked until the road bent toward a long wooden bridge that stretched over dark water. The rain had softened to mist her shoes, heavy with mud. She stood at the center of the bridge, gripping the railing, trying to breathe. The silence was enormous, except for the hum of an approaching truck. Its headlights sliced through the fog, slowing as it neared. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, his jacket dark with rain. His voice was steady but gentle. "Are you all right, miss?" She hesitated, her throat too tight to answer. He took a cautious step closer. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Ethan. I live a few miles up the road." He gestured to the truck, a construction company. Logo faint under the water stains. "You look cold. Let me help you get dry." The kindness in his tone disarmed her more than anger ever could. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not since before Richard. She wanted to run, but her legs gave out, and he caught her before she hit the ground, his jacket wrapped around her shoulders, smelling of cedar and rain. He lifted her into the truck with a strength that felt safe, not possessive. As they drove, he kept his eyes on the road, saying little. The wipers cut steady paths through the storm. When she finally whispered her name, it came out as a ghost of sound, "Isabella." He nodded once and said softly, "You're safe now." The words didn't feel like a promise. They felt like truth. Through the windshield, the first light of dawn began to rise over the river, and for the first time in years, Isabella Grant allowed herself to believe that maybe she had finally escaped not just the mansion, but the life that had stolen her soul. The morning came wrapped in fog and silence. When Isabella opened her eyes, she was in a warm bed, the scent of wood smoke filling the air. Her heart thudded in panic until she remembered the man who had rescued her from the storm. Ethan Hale. His house was nothing like the mansion she had fled. This one was alive, full of small imperfections and quiet sounds, the ticking of a clock, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of the floor when he walked past the door. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her chest, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her mind burning with alertness. A window stood open, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain and pine. She heard the soft clinking of dishes, then his voice low and calm. "Coffee's ready if you're awake." She stepped out carefully, her feet pressing against the cold wooden floor, and followed the scent into the kitchen. Ethan stood at the counter in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, his hair still damp from the rain. He looked nothing like the men she had. No arrogance, no mask of control. His hands were rough from work, his eyes tired but kind. "You sleep at all?" he asked. She nodded slightly, a small lie. He poured her coffee and pushed it across the counter without another word. He didn't ask. Questions about where she came from or who she was. He just let the quiet exist between them. The silence felt almost unreal to her, like standing in sunlight after years underground. She watched him move around the kitchen, easy and unhurried. Then she noticed something out the window, a black SUV parked near the old oak at the end of the dirt road. Her breath hitched. The world that had let her rest for a moment began to tilt again. She set the cup down and tried to steady her voice. "Ethan, who lives out that way?" He turned to look, his brow furrowing. "No one that I know, maybe hunters or surveyors." He glanced back at her and saw the fear in her face. "You running from someone?" he asked softly. She didn't answer, not yet. Instead she looked down at her trembling hands. "I just need to disappear for a while." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, you can stay here. I've got a guest room at the back. No one comes out here unless they're lost." His tone carried no judgment, only quiet certainty. That night the fog thickened around the farmhouse. The world outside was a blur of grey trees and distant thunder. Isabella couldn't sleep. She found herself drawn to the studio at the back of the house, where canvases leaned. Against the walls, half-painted landscapes abandoned mid-stroke. Ethan had said he hadn't picked up a brush in years. She touched one of the canvases and whispered almost to herself, "You used to paint." He stepped into the doorway, his voice low. "Not anymore." Something in his tone made her turn. He looked at the unfinished art, the colors dulled by dust. She could see the shadow of loss in his expression. The man had built his fortune from ruins. She could feel it in every careful word he spoke. They were two broken people standing in a room full of ghosts. Outside, the rain started again, tapping against the windows. Ethan glanced toward the sound and frowned. "That SUV's still out there." "I don't like it. Stay inside tonight. Lock the door, if you have to." She watched him leave to check the gate, his figure fading into the mist. For a moment the fear returned sharp and choking, but then she remembered his words. "You're safe now." As the thunder rolled across the hills, Isabella picked up one of the brushes and drew a line of blue across the canvas. The color bled into life under her hand, fragile but real, and for the first time since escaping, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt the beginning of herself coming back. The next morning, sunlight cut through the fog and filled the farmhouse with gold. The storm had passed, but a strange silence lingered like the pause between heartbeats. Isabella found Ethan outside near the barn, fixing a broken fence. His dog followed, him everywhere, tail wagging, loyal and watchful. She stood at the edge of the porch, watching the way he moved, steady, deliberate every motion, grounded in quiet strength. He looked up and saw her, his smile faint but real. "You should be resting," he said. She shook her head. "I've been resting for too long." He handed her a cup of water, the air between them soft but heavy with something unspoken. They worked together most of the morning, repairing what the wind had torn down, and for the first time, she felt a kind of peace that did not demand permission. She caught him glancing at her more than once, not with curiosity, but with something deeper. A silent question he was afraid to ask. By afternoon, clouds began to gather again, dark and quick. The world seemed to hold its breath when a car engine echoed in the distance, tires crunching over gravel. Ethan turned his head sharply. "No one drives up here without calling first." Isabella froze the sound, drilling straight into her bones. The black SUV crawled up the hill, headlights cutting through dust. Her chest tightened. She backed away, whispering, "No, no, it's him." Ethan stepped in front of her, his tone calm. "Stay inside." He walked toward the road, slow but alert. The vehicle stopped just short of the gate. Two men in suits stepped out, one of them holding a folder. The taller one smiled in that polite, rehearsed way. "Ethan Hale." I assume one of them said, "We're from Marlowe Enterprises. We believe you have someone staying here who belongs To us, Ethan's eyes hardened. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said evenly. The man's smile slipped. "You misunderstand, sir. She's a missing person. Her husband is very concerned." Ethan folded his arms. If her husband cared, he wouldn't have sent men in the rain to drag her back. The agents exchanged a look, and one reached inside his jacket. Ethan caught the motion instantly, his voice dropping lower. "You'll turn around and leave before I make a call. You don't want me to make." They hesitated, then got back into the car. The SUV reversed down the road, disappearing into the trees, but the message was clear. They knew where she was. When Ethan returned to the house, Isabella was trembling. "I told you they'd find me," she whispered. He touched her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Then we don't hide," he said. "We fight back." That night, while lightning flickered across the sky, Ethan showed her the office upstairs, blueprints scattered over the desk, contracts, maps, financial documents. One of them bore the name Marlowe Enterprises. She stared at it in disbelief. "You work with him?" Ethan nodded quietly. "Not anymore. I'm cutting ties tomorrow. He was part of a housing development deal, but if it's him, I'm done." She felt the floor tilt beneath her. The man who had saved her was unknowingly tied to the man who destroyed her. Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "Tell me the truth, Isabella. Who is he really?" She swallowed every word she had been afraid to speak. "Richard Marlowe is my husband, and he will never stop until he owns me again." Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the windows. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply said, "Then he'll have to go through me first." In that moment, Isabella saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Not pity, not control, but belief, the kind that could turn fear into fire. She realized she wasn't just hiding anymore. She was standing on the edge of a war, and she was no longer alone. Night fell heavy and restless over the farmhouse, the kind of darkness that carried secrets in its silence. Isabella lay awake, listening to every creak, every whisper of wind. The storm had passed, but her heart had not stopped racing since the black SUV appeared. She knew Richard's reach extended. Beyond money, it reached into fear itself, and fear was what had kept her trapped for years. Now it was hunting her again. Downstairs, the faint sound of typing drifted through the hall. Ethan was still in his office, working through stacks of contracts and evidence, trying to unravel every link between his company and Marlowe Enterprises. He refused to let her face this alone. That thought both terrified and comforted her. She rose quietly, wrapping his flannel around her shoulders, and followed the glow of light. Ethan looked up when she entered, his eyes sharp from exhaustion. "You should be sleeping," he said. She shook her head softly. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face." Ethan leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "The only way out of fear is through it. You don't run from the monster, you drag it into the light." He turned the laptop toward her. The screen showed bank transactions and charity ledgers. The numbers were wrong, every line a trail of corruption leading back to Richard. "He's been moving money through a foundation that doesn't exist," Ethan said, low and steady. "If we can prove it, the law will come for him before he comes for you." She stared at the screen, her mind spinning. "He's careful," she said. "He destroys everything that threatens him." Ethan met her eyes. "Not everything. Some things survive because they refuse to break." Before she could answer, headlights cut across the window. Bright and sudden, Ethan was on his feet in an instant. He grabbed the pistol from the drawer and motioned for her to stay back. The car stopped at the gate, but no one got out. The silence stretched thin. Then a voice echoed from outside, calm and familiar. "Isabella, come home." His voice crawled through her veins like ice. Ethan's jaw tightened. He moved toward the door, but Isabella caught his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "He'll hurt you." Ethan glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. He already has. He stepped onto the porch, rain beginning to fall. Again, Richard stood in the driveway in a dark coat, his smile sharp as glass. "You really think you can hide her from me, Hale?" Richard called out, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan's tone was quiet but full of steel. "You're right. I don't, but I know what you are, and I know what you did to her." Richard laughed low and cruel. "My wife doesn't understand loyalty. She's sick. She doesn't know what's best for her." Ethan's hand tightened around the railing. "I think she does. And that's why she ran." The storm broke fully, then wind whipping the trees, lightning splitting the sky. Richard's expression changed from amusement to menace. "I'll destroy everything you own," he shouted. "You'll wish you'd never found her." He turned and walked back to his car tires, spinning mud across the gravel as he left. Ethan returned inside, soaked and furious. Isabella stood trembling near the stairs. "He'll ruin you," she whispered. Ethan wiped the rain from his face and looked. "At her I've been ruined before I survived it. You will too." She felt tears rise, but behind them was something fierce. A spark she hadn't felt since before her marriage. Not just fear anymore, but defiance. She walked to the window, watching the taillights disappear into the dark. That night she made a silent promise to herself and to the man who stood beside her. If Richard wanted to wage war, she would not hide. She would build the truth, piece by piece, until it became the weapon that finally set her free. The next morning came with a silence that felt wrong, the kind that hides behind sunlight. Isabella stood by the window, staring at the gravel road that led down the hill. It looked peaceful. But her instincts screamed danger. Ethan was already outside, talking to a man near the gate, one of his foremen from the construction site. She caught fragments of their voices, something about sabotage missing, materials stolen, trucks. Her pulse quickened. Richard was already striking back, not with bullets but with power. When Ethan came back inside, his expression was carved with determination. "He's hitting me where it hurts," he said calmly. "Business contracts, suppliers, rumors spreading about fraud. He's trying to bury me the same way he buried you." Isabella's voice shook. "What are you going to do?" He looked at her and said something that made her heart tremble. "We do it together. You wanted to bring him into the light, right? This is how we start." He opened a folder filled with documents, invoices, bank transfers, all linking Richard to Shell. Companies disguised as charities. Isabella's eyes widened as she recognized her forged signature. At the bottom of one report, "He used my name," she whispered. "He made it look like I helped him steal. He wanted me to be the shield for his crimes." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand steady and warm. "Then we expose the truth and make sure he never does it again." They spent hours working through the evidence, each page another thread unraveling Richard's empire. By nightfall, they had enough to start a fire strong enough to burn his lies. Ethan called one of his friends, a journalist known for uncovering corruption. "I'm sending him everything he said quietly. The world needs to know what he's been hiding." But as they uploaded the files, the power suddenly cut out, plunging the farmhouse into darkness. The computer screen went black and the hum of the generator stopped. Ethan cursed under his breath. "That's not a coincidence." Isabella's heart pounded. She grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the back door. The glass was cracked. A shadow moved outside. Ethan motioned for her to stay quiet. He slipped toward the door and stepped into the night. The rain had started again, soft but steady. The beam of the flashlight caught muddy footprints leading from the road to the porch. He followed them around the corner and froze. The security cameras were ripped out, wires dangling like veins. Whoever had been there knew exactly what they were doing. Inside, Isabella tried to stay calm, but the sound of her own breathing filled the silence. Then her phone buzzed once, even though it had no service. A single text flashed on the screen, a number she knew too well. It read, "You can't hide forever." When Ethan returned, his voice was firm but controlled. "Pack a bag," he said. "We're leaving tonight." She stared at him. "Where will we go?" "Anywhere he can't reach us." He pulled a hidden envelope from the desk filled with cash and IDs he had planned. For this he always did, but as they reached, the truck headlights flared at the end of the road. Cutting through the rain, a convoy of dark cars began to climb. The hill Richard wasn't sending threats this time. He was coming himself. Ethan turned to Isabella, his voice low and certain. "Get in the truck and don't look back." She hesitated, tears mixing with the rain. He touched her cheek and said, "You've already survived him once. You can survive him again." Engines roared closer, lightning splitting the sky. The war she had feared had finally arrived, but this time she wasn't the one running. This time she was ready to fight. The tires screamed against the wet road as Ethan drove down the winding hill. Rain slashing against the windshield. Isabella clutched the door handle, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear his voice. He didn't look back once, not even when the headlights appeared in the mirrors like a line of fire snaking after them. Richard's men were closing in. Ethan's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead. "Hold on," he said. "We're not letting them corner us again." The road curved toward the old industrial district, a maze of warehouses and abandoned shipyards. The perfect place to disappear if they were fast enough. He turned sharply onto a side street, the truck bouncing through puddles. The engines behind them roared closer, flashing beams. Cutting through the storm, Ethan pulled into a half-collapsed building and killed the lights. The truck fell silent, only the rain beating against the metal roof. They waited, hearts racing, the sound of approaching. Engines grew louder, then faded away. Isabella's hand shook, but her voice was steady. "He'll never stop, Ethan. He doesn't know how." Ethan turned to her, his face lit by lightning. "He will when we take everything he built and make it his undoing." "You still have the files on the drive?" She nodded, pulling it from her pocket, wrapped in the torn page of her sketchbook. He smiled faintly. "That's our weapon now." They stayed hidden until dawn, the storm easing into fog. When the first light broke, Ethan made a call from a payphone. He spoke quickly, his voice low, sending the journalist the final proof, the stolen accounts, the fake charities, the forged documents. Everything Richard had tried to hide would soon be everywhere. Isabella watched him, a strange calm spreading through her. She wasn't the frightened woman who had run barefoot through the rain anymore. She was the one carrying the truth. Hours later, as they reached a small coastal town, a breaking news alert flashed across a TV in a diner window. Richard Marlowe accused of large-scale embezzlement. Federal investigation launched. Isabella froze, staring at his photo on the screen. The mask was gone, his perfect smile replaced by fear. The reporter spoke about his wife missing, presumed kidnapped, and the truth burning its way through every network. Ethan touched her shoulder. "It's starting," he said, but she shook her head. "It's not over, not until he faces me." That night they checked into a motel near the harbor. The sea outside was calm, but she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her heart jump. Ethan sat near the window, watching the street, his pistol resting on the table. For a moment the silence stretched like glass. Then a car stopped outside, headlights slicing through the curtain. A knock followed, slow, deliberate. Ethan motioned for her to stay quiet. He opened the door just an inch and froze. A man in a raincoat stood there, his badge glinting in the dim light. "Federal agents, ma'am." "Sir, we need you to come with us." They entered cautiously, the older agent nodding to Ethan. "We got your message, Mr. Hale. Your evidence checks out, but we need her testimony to lock Marlowe away." Isabella's throat tightened. "If I do this, he'll come after me." The agent looked at her steadily. "He's already falling, he just doesn't know it yet." They drove her to the courthouse under protection. She signed her statement, hands trembling as cameras flashed outside. When she walked out, Ethan was waiting, leaning against the car. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since her escape, she smiled, a real one. He asked quietly, "How does it feel?" She took a deep breath, like the first breath after drowning. "Free," she said. But as they drove away, a black car turned onto the street behind them, unnoticed, the same one that had followed them since the storm. Inside sat a single man with cold eyes, watching every move. Richard Marlowe wasn't finished yet. The courthouse steps were still slick from rain when Isabella and Ethan walked out, flashes from reporters bursting like lightning around them. The agents guided them toward the car, shielding them from the noise, but she could still hear fragments of shouting, "Is it true you were abused? Did you steal from your husband?" The words felt like bullets, each one a reminder of the world she had escaped. Ethan squeezed her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Keep walking," he whispered. "They can't touch." You now inside the car, the sound of the city faded, replaced by the low hum of tires on wet pavement. Ethan exhaled finally. "It's done," he said, but Isabella shook her head. "No, it isn't. Not until I see him face what he did." She turned toward the window, her reflection pale against the grey sky. There was strength in her voice now, the kind that comes after surviving fire. They drove to a safe house near the edge of town, a quiet place surrounded by tall oaks and the smell of salt from the nearby harbor. The agents promised protection while the case unfolded, but both of them knew Richard would try something before it was over. That night the air was heavy with unease. Isabella stood on the porch, staring into the dark. She could feel him out there like a shadow waiting to strike. The crickets had gone silent, and the wind carried the faint scent of smoke. She turned back toward the house when a sound cut through the stillness, the crunch of gravel, a car rolling to a stop. Ethan appeared at the door, his voice low and sharp. "Get inside now." Before she could move, headlights flooded the yard, and the black car emerged from the trees. The door opened slowly, and Richard stepped out. His suit rumpled, his face drawn, but his eyes burning with the same cruel certainty that had once broken her. He smiled when he saw her, the runaway wife, he said softly, and the savior who thinks he can protect her. "You both made a terrible mistake." Ethan moved between them, his voice calm but in cold. "You're trespassing. Marlowe, leave while you still can." Richard laughed and held up a phone. "You think the world believes her? I still own half the people investigating me. The truth won't matter when I make her disappear again." Isabella stepped forward, trembling but unafraid. "Not this time, Richard. This time everyone saw who you really are. You can't hide behind your money anymore." He took a step toward her, fury twisting his features. "You were nothing without me." She met his eyes, steady and unbroken. "I was nothing because of you." The words hit him harder than any weapon. He lunged, but Ethan caught him, the two men crashing against the gravel. The fight was brutal. Rain beginning to fall again, thunder rolling overhead. Richard swung, wildly shouting curses. But Ethan's fury was silent, controlled. He pinned him down, just as sirens echoed in the distance. The agents arrived within seconds, pulling Ethan back and dragging Richard to his feet. He screamed her name over and over. As they shoved him into the car, his voice swallowed by the storm, Isabella stood there, shaking, water streaming down her face. She wasn't sure if it was rain or tears. Ethan walked to her. His hands scraped his shirt. "Soaked," he whispered. "It's over." She shook her head. "No, it's beginning." The next morning, the world woke to headlines showing Richard Marlowe in handcuffs, his empire collapsing one company at a time. Federal agents raided his offices, uncovering hidden accounts and blackmail files. The man who had once owned her life was finally exposed, but as she watched the news, Isabella felt something unexpected, not triumph, but peace. She turned to Ethan, who was standing behind her, coffee in hand, and smiled faintly. "You didn't save me," she said. "You reminded me I could save myself." He smiled back and said, "That's all I ever wanted." Outside, the first light of dawn broke across the sea, and the storm clouds drifted away. The war was over, but something new was beginning, something made, not of fear or pain, but of freedom and love that had survived the fire months past. But the echoes of that night still lived in Isabella's dreams. Sometimes she could still hear the rain, the shouts, the sound of freedom breaking like glass around. Her Richard Marlowe's empire had fallen. His name dragged through every headline, his face stamped on every screen, yet even from behind bars, his presence haunted her. The world knew the truth now, but the scars he left weren't the kind that faded. With time, they lived quietly under her skin. Ethan never rushed her. He stayed by her side as she rebuilt her life piece by piece. In the mornings, she painted again, filling the farmhouse with color and light. In the evenings, he worked beside her fixing the old roof, planting a garden where she could watch things grow. They didn't talk much about the past, but it lingered between them like a storm cloud that refused to move. One night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Isabella walked outside. The sea glowing faintly under the moon, she felt the pull of the world beyond the farm. Her heart steady now, unafraid. Ethan found her there, his voice low. "You've been quiet lately." She smiled a little. "It's strange I finally have peace, and yet I keep waiting for it to vanish." He stepped closer. "It won't not if you stop looking back." But before she could answer, the sound of tires crushed the gravel road again. She froze, memories slamming through her chest. Ethan's hand went to her arm, his eyes scanning the darkness. A black car pulled up slow and silent. A man stepped out, but it wasn't Richard. It was one of the federal agents from before. His face was serious but calm. He handed Ethan an envelope, Marlowe's being transferred. "Tonight," he said quietly. He requested to see her. Ethan looked at her, shaking his head. "You don't owe him anything." Isabella took the envelope, her fingers trembling. "Maybe not, but I need to see the face of the man who no longer owns me." That night. She walked into the federal detention center, the lights humming low, the smell of cold metal and paper filling the air. Richard sat behind glass, thinner, gaunter, but the same cruel glint hiding behind his eyes. When he saw her, his lips curved into a bitter smile. "You finally got what you wanted," he said softly. "I lost everything." She met his gaze, calm and steady. "No, Richard, I got what you never understood. Freedom isn't taking, it's letting go." He laughed, but there was no power left in the sound. "You think they'll let you live happily ever after? You'll always be the woman who ran?" Isabella leaned closer. "The difference is, I'll never run again." Then she stood and walked away, leaving him staring at his reflection for the first time without someone to blame. Outside, the night air felt clean, the sky wide and endless. Ethan was waiting by the car. She stepped into his arms, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sea roared somewhere in the distance, the sound wild and alive. She looked up at him and whispered, "It's over for real this time." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "No, Isabella, it's just beginning." Weeks later, the farmhouse was transformed. The garden bloomed, the air filled with laughter from volunteers, helping build the first shelter under Isabella's new foundation, Haven House, for women escaping abuse. The same hands that once trembled now held blueprints. The same heart that once hid now gave others courage. Reporters came to see the woman, who turned her pain into purpose, but she didn't crave attention. She only wanted peace. One evening, as the sun sank low, Ethan joined her by the fence, watching the horizon. She looked at him, her eyes soft with something deeper than words. "You gave me more than safety, Ethan. You gave me back myself." He smiled. "That was always yours, Isabella. You just needed someone to remind you." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain again. But this time, it didn't bring fear. It brought life. The ocean shimmered, gold as the last light touched the water. She reached for his hand and whispered, "We were born from the storm, weren't we?" He nodded, and we survived it, as night settled over the fields. Isabella turned toward the house, laughter echoing from inside. And for the first time in forever, she didn't feel like someone who had escaped. She felt like someone who had finally come home.